Now, today we're going to talk about a surprise in the world of soccer. Barcelona have sacked their head coach, Ernesto Valverde. It's the first time Barca have sacked a coach since 2003. They are top of La Liga, and they've won the last 2 Spanish titles. So, what went wrong? We're joined now from Barcelona by an Irish journalist who lives there, Richard Fitzpatrick. Richard is a contributor to the Irish Times and other publications. Richard, Barca are not in the habit of sacking managers in mid-season, and the last coach to go was Louis van Gaal in 2003. So what did Valverde do?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary situation. It's come from left field. They've just hit the self-destruct button. So if you just rewind about a week, the 4 top clubs in Spain were in Saudi Arabia playing a Spanish Super Cup Final Four tournament, semi-final playoffs, and then the final on Sunday night, which Real Madrid won on penalties against Atletico. And in Barca's semi-final, they played Atletico on Thursday night, and they were leading 2-1, and there was a surge from Atletico in the last 10 minutes, and Atletico won 3-2. Panic set in at Barca. This had come on the back of a 2-2 draw with Espanyol in the league. And it goes back to just the confidence in Ernesto Valverde in the club. He's done very well in his job as coach for the last 2.5 seasons. As you mentioned, he won 2 league titles. They qualified for the knockout stages of the Champions League with a game to spare, top in their group. They've got one of the easier draws in the knockout stages against Napoli, top of the table by goal difference in La Liga. And funnily enough, that performance, although they lost with us in the last 10 minutes, it was probably the best performance of the season. They played really well. They had 2 goals disallowed when they were 2-1 up. They had 2 goals disallowed by VAR. So they should have won the game. But the board decided we have to get rid of Ernesto Valverde. Because he's been so unpopular with the section of the fans all season. But it all goes back to this crushing defeat to Liverpool in the Champions League semi-final last May. There isn't confidence in Valverde. There's more deep-seated problems in the club to do with player power, and in particular the direction of the board. There's no leadership at an institutional level. But Valverde was the fall guy. The big problem is that they've created this crisis, and they haven't solved any problems in doing so. They tried to get rid of Valverde during the summer, but there was nobody else who would take the job. They asked Ronald Koeman, for example, Dutch national team coach. He said no. They asked him again at the weekend if he'd take over, and he was there. Why are you guys calling me? I told you last summer I wouldn't go until after the European Championships. He's the Dutch national team coach. And their number one target when they did decide to sack Valverde was Xavi Hernandez, the great icon of Barca's tiki-taka school of football. He's in Qatar. Their senior directors were in Qatar. The sporting director, Abidal, was one of those guys. They jumped across from Saudi Arabia to Qatar on Friday, had a meeting with Xavi, asked him would he come back. He thought about it, and then on Sunday he said no. We can get into the history of the kind of poor relationship with those great players and the kind of Puyol, Xavi generation. They don't get on well with this board, and there's an election due in 18 months' time, so those guys are hanging on for that new president to come in before they return to the club. But they've just made it an absolute hames of things. Right. And so what they've done now, without getting any of their preferred candidates, they've had to give the job to a journeyman manager, Quique Setien, who is a Cruyffist, who believes in the tiki-taka style of football. He's a big proponent of it, but he doesn't have a good track record in management apart from playing that style of football. And he's walked into a carnage.
Yeah, just in passing, Richard, the decision to play the games in Saudi Arabia, I mean, it was the Spanish Super Cup, which is the equivalent of our Community Shield. It's no big deal, but playing in Saudi Arabia, certainly to some extent, it's a money grab, but it's also a very controversial place to engage in sport now. They are going in for sports washing, it's called, the Saudis. They've had top tennis players there. They've had golf tournaments there with the top players in the world, although significantly Rory McIlroy declined to go there. Was there any reaction in Spain to going to Saudi Arabia to play this tournament?
Absolutely, there was, yeah. Funnily enough, Ernesto Valverde, Barca's sacked coach, was the only guy to call them out on it. And in the press conference before that semi-final defeat to Atletico,
yes,
he said, look, as you say, it was a money grab. He said it's a football industry which is desperate to find new ways to bring in income. This is why we're here. He got criticised for that by, for example, Dani Carvajal, one of Real Madrid's captains. He said if Valverde was upset, he should make a formal complaint. But, back in Spain, the footballing public were very upset about it. The fans missed out, and it is effectively a pre-season tournament, but the stadiums are full for those games when they play the two-legged final every August.
Yes.
So Barca and Valencia's fans at home in their cities missed out on the chance to see those games. Significantly, the Spanish state broadcaster refused to bid for the rights for the games, and they didn't want to touch it. As you suggest, Saudi Arabia has a really poor human rights record. There's a lot of women, for example, in prison because of their activism. And the Spanish Football Federation were making a big play out of how women were allowed to go into the ground for the football stadium for the first time in non-segregated stadiums. If you go to Saudi Arabia, the McDonald's restaurants and stuff are segregated.
Yes.
But this is... it remains to be seen if these changes will make any difference, or what happens outside the football stadiums, particularly all these activists in prison.
Well, also the fact that they murdered a journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, in Turkey. He was a critic of the regime who worked for the Washington Post and was domiciled in the United States. This is a horrendous crime in which the Crown Prince appears to be involved, although others have been punished for that crime now. Let's just move back to Barca because this is big news. Is there sort of dressing room power at play in all of the decisions they make now? And when you consider particularly Lionel Messi as a strong voice in the dressing room, is there a problem with the power that's still there with people like Piqué, Messi, Busquets? These are part of the great team that was coached by Guardiola and won 2 Champions Leagues.
Yeah, there's a big problem with player power in that dressing room. There's kind of 6 or 7 heavyweights in the dressing room. You mentioned a few of them. Piqué, Messi, Suarez would be and Busquets would be the main leaders of that team. There's been so much evidence of the kind of the extent to the power that they wield. Like Gerard Piqué, for example, he's moonlighting as sports management expert. He's revamped the Davis Cup tennis tournament. He admitted in an interview a couple of months ago that he was only getting 4 or 5 hours sleep a night because he was so consumed with this job, flying around the world, meeting with the star tennis players and administrators, trying to get this tournament up and running again. His performances on the pitch as a result have suffered. And he already had got 9 yellow cards within about 9 or 10 games at the start of the season, more than he had accumulated for the whole of last season. He's been playing on the edge and hasn't been at 100%. He's got a guy like Artur, a Brazilian player, Brazilian midfielder in the squad.
Yes.
He was out injured. He's out injured at the moment with a groin injury. TV3, the Catalan television station, reported that he was disciplined by the club for snowboarding while out injured. It was a farcical situation for a professional athlete. So you've got this culture within the club where the players call the shots. Ernesto Valverde, he did the best he could with the cards he was dealt. He did stand up to the players, and in that he, would have dropped Sergio Busquets a couple of times. He dropped Griezmann, so he wasn't afraid to make those kind of moves. But trying to rein in their power was a job beyond him, and that goes back to the culture at the club. There's no leadership from the president. You could be rest assured that if that kind of carry-on was going on at Real Madrid, Florentino Perez, the president there, would step in, but you don't have that kind of leadership at board level at Barca.
Incidentally, how has Griezmann done since he moved there from Atletico? My understanding is he has found it difficult to find a role in the team, given the presence of Lionel Messi, of course, which is huge, and also of Suarez.
The jury is still out on Griezmann. As you mentioned, he joined the club and there wasn't a specific position for him to fill. Messi holds that position already. So he just shunted out onto the left wing in front, attacking 3. He was dropped a couple of times by Valverde for big games. But he has chipped in with goals. He scored 7 or 8 at this stage. He scored a goal against Atletico in that Super Cup semi-final.
Yes.
So he's slowly but surely gelling. And now critically, there will be more space for him to evolve because Luis Suarez has just undergone knee surgery and he'll be out for 4 months. It could signal the end of his career at the club.
Right.
He's only 18 months to run on his contract. He's just turning 33. So Griezmann now will have a more central role. And they will badly need him now.
Now, Richard, we'd be very interested in Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid. Real play Manchester City in the Champions League, and Atletico, of course, are playing the holders Liverpool. Madrid seem to have picked up quite a bit in the last few weeks. How big a threat do you think they might pose to City?
I would say they'll pose a huge threat. I know in Madrid they'll be relishing that tie and they'll consider themselves favourites to win it. There's no illusions about their success rate in the European Cup and the Champions League, particularly over the last decade. Every season, pretty much except for last season, they've been in the semi-final and they've won 4 of those titles. There's been a big resurgence under Zidane. It's a very impressive resurgence. When he returned to the club last spring, they were just about to end the league title race, 19 points adrift of Barca. They've been humiliated by Ajax in the Champions League knockout stages. They had trouble adjusting. They spent a lot of money off season in the summer. But they started poorly, and notably that they got trashed 3-0 by Paris Saint-Germain. Paris Saint-Germain team that was without Neymar and Mbappe. But pretty much since that result, it turned things around. They've gone on a run now, 15 or 16 games unbeaten. They won that Spanish Super Cup title at the weekend without their front 3, Bale, Benzema and Hazard, who were out injured, or in Bale's case, he was out with the flu. So it was a huge fillip for the confidence. Florentino Perez, the president, just in love with Zidane for now, anyway, describing him as a blessing that has come from heaven. So look, all of this will only count for a hill of beans if they don't deliver a league title by the end of the season, or possibly a Champions League title. But at the moment, it's in Spain, the sensations are good. The only caveat is that they had trouble scoring goals. Benzema has really stepped up since Cristiano Ronaldo was sold to Juventus. But he's playing really well. He's just a goal behind Leo Messi and the top scorers in La Liga. But outside of Benzema, there's nobody. I think Sergio Ramos and Rafael Varane are the next top scorers. Hazard has been out injured for a lot of the season so far, so he hasn't prospered yet. And Bale is noticeably deteriorating.
Right. Atletico Madrid against Liverpool is the other big tie, really, of that round. Now, we know Simeone is a great coach, but we also know that Atletico have been through something of a transformation. They let Griezmann go. Godin also left the club, their great leader, centre-half. And they are going through a transformation. But I noticed that they're right there in the Liga. They're up there with challenging Madrid and Barcelona.
They are. This season, both Real Madrid and Barcelona lost points early in the season. Atletico surged ahead. They've dropped back since, but they're still in the hunt. But it's, as you allude to, it is a year of transition for them. They lost 4 of their starting defence during the summer, and Griezmann in particular up front, and also Rodri, their holding midfielder. So the spine of the team is taken out. It's a major failing with the club under Simeone. There's no dressing for the salad, as we say in Spain. There's no goals. They've only scored 22 goals, I think, in 19 league games this season. So they're really struggling to find goals. But they will relish that tie against Liverpool. The first game critically is at home for Atletico. So they were brilliant last season in the knockout stages in that first encounter with Juventus in the last 16. But they'd won 2-0, could have won by more. So they'll be looking to ambush Liverpool in that game and maybe sneak a 1-0 or something and go to Anfield with some hope. But it would be a big ask. You know, we all know about the form of Liverpool at the moment, but you would never underestimate Simeone to pull off a heist like that.
Just a final question, Richard, about Barcelona in the medium to long term in terms of a coach. If Ronald Koeman, a former Barca player and a very great player for that club, if he is turning it down at the moment, and if Xavi also, you know, their great leader, captain, if he's turning it down, the problem in the dressing room would need to be sorted before any top coach, I would imagine, would contemplate going there. So they're going to have a problem, Barca, in the short term anyway.
A big problem, because not only that, the club's philosophy, they're wedded to this tiki-taka style of football, so they're very obsessive about trying to get coaches to fill that mold. Frank Rijkaard, Louis van Gaal are in-house. That's why they've got to Xavi. They see him as another Pep Guardiola and part of this school of football. So that limits their options. So that's why they're looking at a guy like Ronald Koeman, who doesn't have a good CV in football management. He's doing well now with the Dutch national team, but at club level he's one, you know, you would have seen at Everton. He didn't set the world alight there. He's won very few titles as a manager. Xavi is also a shot in the dark. He's unproven.
Yes.
He's managing outside in Qatar at the moment. They're third in the tables, and that would be a gamble as well. But he will definitely manage that club one day. But the question is whether he will come in under this regime. It's the second time they've asked him, and he said no. They asked him to coach the reserve team a couple of years ago. He said no. I mentioned Carlos Puyol earlier. He was asked to become a sporting director a couple of months ago. The club has had 4 sporting directors in 4 years, which tells its own story. He said no, and this board is toxic to those players. They have this guy Kiki Setien in at the moment. He's got a contract till 2022, but if he doesn't win a title this season with Messi in his ranks, he'll be out the door. There's other names that are possible, like Mauricio Pochettino, he lives in Barcelona. He's an ex-Espanyol player and manager. He said he'd rather work in a farm than coach Barca, but I wouldn't rule him out coming because he would be a good fit for their culture. But so we just have to wait and see. But they've created a mess.
Okay. Richard Fitzpatrick in Barcelona, thank you very much indeed for joining us.